Hello and welcome everybody to the Pokerfuse podcast. This is episode 13 coming to you on Friday, May 3rd, 2019. I'm your host, Mike Gentili, along with my co-host, Nick Jones. Nick, what's going on in your world today?
Ooh, what's going on in my world? I will say that it's felt like the first week at work for a while that's just been like a normal regular week. There's been some interesting news, we've written about it, and it hasn't been some mad rush of finishing a report or that kind of thing. So it's been a very good week in my world. I'd almost forgotten what it's like, just a nice Monday to Friday where we publish news and carry on with our lives. So it's been very good from that perspective.
Those types of weeks do seem few and far between at times. I will agree. But yeah, it's good that things are getting back to normal. There's a pretty full news cycle that's happened over the last week or so we'll have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there's certainly going to be a full episode. It was our first only week since we recorded the last one, which for a while. But it's going to be more than enough to cover. In fact, we could probably touch on some topics that we're not going to be covering in the podcast this week.
Yeah. So there are some that maybe fall out of our area of expertise, or just even topics that we want to cover. I would say that. I definitely have recommendations of where the listeners can go and get more information if they are so inclined. Some of those topics might be, and how did I put it out on a tweet on Pokerfuse this week? The Battle Royale week, because it seems like there's just so many people in conflict.
Yeah, and always, of course, check out f5poker.com. We do try and do wrap-ups and summarise some more of the social media oriented spats in the poker community, but it's the kind of topics that perhaps we don't cover so much on this podcast. There was a prop bet boxing match in the last week, which we're probably not going to talk about too much.
That you can find on F5 for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. What else has been? Probably stuff about markup.
Well, let's talk about that prop bet, though. Just at least by saying the names, it was Antonio Spendiari and Kevin Hart had an actual boxing match. So definitely interesting to a certain segment of our listeners, I'm sure.
Yeah, and so I read about that, and people saying we were shocked at how prepared and athletic Antonio was. I mean, I immediately thought back to the High Stakes Poker episode of 9 or 10 years ago when he did the push-ups prop bet and just smashed it out of the park. And it turns out the dude is pretty fit. And I think, as I recall, that High Stakes Poker ended up putting a ban on prop bets on the show. I think that was the last one. That's how I remember it anyway.
Okay. And I didn't have the frame of reference that Kevin Hart was. I think I've heard that he's well trained at boxing, perhaps, and maybe that was part of the reason that he was the favorite. But yeah, that's just out of my scope of knowledge, so I didn't have that reference.
Yeah, so that's the most we're going to dive into that. So other topics, definitely markup. Seen every time I'm on Twitter, there's somebody talking about markup, which I don't know anything about, but there's that.
Well, it started as markup, and in the feud that we're talking about is between Daniel Negreanu and Sean Deeb and various other people that got involved in the markup situation, but it quickly devolved into more personal attacks. So that's another topic we won't be covering.
Yeah, I mean, if listeners out there would like to get our hot takes on these topics, do let us know. We can probably chime into a segment here or there. And it's on social media. It's on F5 Poker if you want more. But at the time being, we're going to leave it to some of the other great podcasts out there that really do get down in the weeds on these topics. Yeah,
so the Fives, I know I haven't had a chance to listen to that exact episode, but I did read the description, and so they cover those two spats as well as the 50 Cent and other poker player guy. And I don't even know who it is.
I haven't got around to listening to it for a while, but I presume that Poker Podcast, being that it has Daniel Negreanu as a co-host and Terence Chan, probably both have opinions regarding the fight prop bet, and you're going to get Daniel's input on quite a lot of his side of the argument, so that's out there as well.
Also, the Poker Life podcast with Joey Ingram. He's been really killing it as of late, as he normally does. But he did have a very entertaining episode where Sean Deeb was actually in studio and discussing the spat from his perspective.
Yeah, so there you go. And of course, one more little plug for us. If you want to browse more podcasts beyond this one, pokerfuse.com/poke-podcasts. I think we have a huge directory spanning 8-9 years of poker-related podcasts that gets updated automatically. So we have like a dozen or so shows listed there. So if you want to explore a bit more outside of mine and Mike's voice, then definitely dive in there.
Yeah, and now that you say it like that, 8 or 9 years, I don't think we even let the listeners know that we had a birthday not too long ago.
Yeah, we did.
And
You're right.
It was April 15th, so a couple of weeks back, and we are now officially in our 9th year.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
There you go. On that bombshell, let's dive into the news. So mixing up our usual scheduling, we are starting the show with our segment on US-related news. Two things, Mike, I want to get your take on. We did a really interesting article on Poker Industry Pro this week about the latest in the Wire Act and potential positive interpretations there, and also want to touch on something I think that's just been published on Pokerfuse about the World Series of Poker and bracelet events in Nevada and New Jersey. So the Wire Act, take us through where we are with that.
Yeah, so I definitely can't take credit for this because this is not my argument, but we did come across a blog post on IFRA law, and for those of you that may not know, Jeff IFRA is probably the top gaming attorney in the country, if not maybe even the world. He was very instrumental in the days following Black Friday with his representation, and I don't even remember who he was representing, to be quite honest, at that point. But I know that at some point he was representing PokerStars. He came out and publicly was answering questions on 2+2, so he really tried to engage with the community during that period of time. And anyway, his firm, still actively involved in the iGaming industry, published a blog post that outlined a couple of potential ways forward that on interstate online poker in the U.S. could coexist with the current opinion of the DOJ about the Wire Act.
And this is not just his kind of outside take on it. As you say, like he's directly involved, and he's involved in the current legal battle. Is that right? Right.
So he's representing one of the industry associations, the iDevelopment and Economic Association, which is basically looking out for the interests of online gaming in the U.S.
So as listeners to the podcast will know, the Wire Act reinterpretation has thrown a huge spanner in the works of cross-border shared liquidity in online poker, saying that bets can't be taken across state lines, which seems to be a fairly clear-cut kind of blackball of the current status quo. But there are a couple of interpretations, I think, Jeff Ifra put forward that might suggest there could be more charitable interpretations.
Yeah, so one is that they're working because there's a current court battle that involves the New Hampshire Lottery Commission, and one of the proposals is, so what happened when this lawsuit came out, the DOJ responded by saying, oh, no, we didn't mean to include the lottery because things like Powerball, which is very popular here in the U.S., would be in jeopardy. So with that in mind, IFRA put forth the idea that if we roll things like online poker and online casino games to be under the guise of state lotteries, that could provide the opportunity for such activity as shared liquidity pools to exist. Now, that type of structure is currently in place in Delaware. So their lottery department does handle all of their online gaming, online casino games, and online poker. So that is a potential way forward.
It's bizarre that it sounds basically this reinterpretation of the Wire Act, which, as we understand, was politically motivated, and there was some very good reporting on that around the time about potentially why this interpretation came out at the time that it did and where that political influence came from. But it almost sounds like this interpretation was written without them even understanding the ramifications themselves. Like, so they wrote this, and then it was pointed out that so you're saying that our nationwide lotteries like Powerball, can't exist. We didn't mean it like that. It's
yeah. Well, anyone that follows politics in the U.S. knows that that's kind of the MO of this administration to begin with. But let's not get too political, and we can dive into the second option, which I find to be the most interesting. And so, as they outlined it, there was a decision by a U.S. Court of Appeals in 1993 that stated that the Wire Act was not designed to criminalize acts that either the states or Congress have deemed to be criminal. And if you apply that to the online gaming industry as it's evolved currently in the U.S., including interstate online poker, it's not explicitly illegal by federal law, and it's not explicitly illegal. In fact, it is explicitly legal in state law. So if they interpret the Wire Act to mean only those activities that are explicitly illegal within the states, that would allow states that legalize online poker to offer interstate online poker, and the current interpretation of the Wire Act would then not prohibit, what we see with like the All-American Poker Network that spans Delaware, New Jersey, and Nevada.
Yeah, and that seems to me, some on the outside reading on the issue, by far the most positive potential path forward, which will allow for this interpretation to kind of stand whilst still allowing for cross-border shared liquidity.
Yeah, and what I've read is that the judge in the case is actually, I won't say losing patience, but trying to move things forward at a decent pace. So it's possible that we could see some kind of decision coming out soon. The DOJ did extend their enforcement deadline to be June 14th, which I think we touched on previously. So if that date alone is only like 6 weeks away, it seems like we're going to have some clearer picture coming soon.
Yeah, so we have kind of three key dates coming up in quick succession. We have, the first is the start of the World Series of Poker, which is the end of this month, the first event start, right? I think like 28th, 29th of May. So that's in 3-4 weeks' time. We have this deadline for when current operators in the US markets must bring their operations in line with this new Wire Act interpretation. So that has direct impact, and we'll touch on this in a second, but has direct impact on the World Series of Poker, on 888, on Caesars, who operate under the MSIGA, the cross-border network that they run. And then we have Pennsylvania going live, which is in mid-July. As we know, and it has been the case regardless, it was always going to be closed liquidity initially, but with the hope that they would permit for operators. And this is going to impact, I think, the operators that go live in Pennsylvania, how much marketing push they put behind it, potentially which operators launch at all. Because if there is doesn't look like there's the near to mid-term hope of cross-border shared liquidity, we're not going to see some of the smaller operators entering the market and trying to claim their kind of market share ahead of this coming in. So that's 3 dates coming up in the next 2 months, which can absolutely define the shape of online poker in the United States.
Yeah, it should be an eventful couple of months coming up, and it will be definitely interesting to watch.
Yeah, and as you say, so the court case is going on, and as you touched on, Mike, sounds like the stakeholders involved, including the judges presiding over it, realise the timeline that everybody is working to, and decisions have to be hopefully clarified within some of these dates.
Yeah, It's happening rapidly, and will have potentially long-lasting effects, and will definitely have an effect on the very near term, which could include, which will include the World Series of Poker. So currently, and maybe we can get into that now. It's a good segue. So the World Series of Poker has this year, for their 50th anniversary, upped the total number of online bracelet events to 9. I believe it was 4 last year, so it's more than doubled. And initially they had come out because we had asked, what is going to be the status of these online events? Because last year, the players that were actually physically in New Jersey were able to compete for these online bracelet events. And even one player from New Jersey won one of the events. So the question was this year, how do they plan on handling it given the new interpretation of the Wire Act?
Yeah, and we knew in advance in recent press releases that they were aware that this interpretation will have an impact on what they can do, and the WSOP is in a tricky spot because they have run promotions, they have run presumably online satellites for players in New Jersey to play these online events, and depending on the decisions made in the courts, they may not be able to. And so this has definitely been a cloud hanging over them, a decision that had to be made. We have a bit of information, I think, up now or soon going up on Pokerfuse. A few more details now. Yeah,
so yesterday we noticed that the online bracelet events were being promoted in New Jersey by WSOP. We reached out to them. Seth Polanski did confirm to us that at least the first 2 events will be open to players in New Jersey. And those 2 events, which I don't have the dates in front of me, but they're both in early June, do happen to take place before that enforcement deadline on June 14th. So it seemed like that was a pretty safe move. And it's definitely encouraging to see that at least those first 2 events are going to be open to players in New Jersey as well.
Yeah, I mean, you say it's the safest move, and obviously it gives them the scope to make a last-minute call, basically. But I mean, the easiest decision would have been to have dealt with this by now and have just made the call and stopped any New Jersey players playing in bracelet events and dealt with anybody who's won a package up to now with an equivalent version, and that would have kind of at least made it clear cut and made it easier for them to organise their marketing. Maybe they make a big thing about a New Jersey player who's won a package and fly them over to Nevada and play from the floor of the Rio or something like that. So that was kind of the alternative avenue they could have done and haven't.
And so I think they did take some very big precautionary step ahead of announcing these events, and it kind of has been flying under the radar a bit, and that's that they removed any and all guarantees from these events, presumably in the anticipation that they may not be able to offer them to players in New Jersey.
So there were originally guarantees posted on the online events?
No, but last year, 3 of the 4 events had guarantees. This year, none of the 9 have guarantees.
Okay.
And last year, the guaranteed events did really well. They all, blew past those guarantees. But this year, and it could be unrelated, but it seemed like it was a measured approach to take away those guarantees in the event that they would not be able to offer them to players in New Jersey.
Yeah, and it could be a bizarre time over May, June, July, where we might have people playing the first 2 events, then all of a sudden they will have to be locked out of all the MTTs in the future. And if you're in Nevada grinding online the whole time, the first 2 bracelet events might have X number of entries, and then all of a sudden it cuts by 75%. This is all very much up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially for those people that were hoping to play these online events in New Jersey. It's not everyone can make it out to Las Vegas over the summer, so that's definitely appealing. And it's also something to watch if you're in Pennsylvania, because this, even though, as you stated earlier, they weren't planning on sharing liquidity with the initial rollout, we all know that is something that is on the minds of the operators, which will eventually make it a priority for the regulators, and how that eventually plays out is yet to be determined. A very common theme that we have noticed over the past year or so is new games coming out from PokerStars. And once again, this week, there is more news regarding new games coming out from PokerStars. Nick, what games can the players expect to see that perhaps they haven't seen before, or maybe haven't seen in a while?
Yeah, so preparing for this podcast, I was just putting together a few notes about all the games that we think are coming up or might be coming up, and the details that we know. And I realised that my list was getting so long, I ended up throwing it up in a really long Twitter thread of something like 20 posts about everything that we've covered. I think we've done over some 12 or so pieces of content over the last couple of weeks about PokerStars plans for product development. None of it actually announced by PokerStars yet, so this is just what we glean from some of the things that they do a little bit behind the scenes. And it's something that we've done the last couple of years, often announcing some of their games a couple of months ahead of time. And it definitely seems that for 2019, PokerStars are gearing up for two things. So one is that we think that 6+ Hold'em is going to be permanent. It's something that we suspected from the outset, and PokerStars said wouldn't be the case, but I still think it probably will be the case. It's been live in the client for over 100 days now. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think 6+ will be a game offered by the top 2 online poker operators for the foreseeable.
Is it officially the longest variant that has been released? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The longest in 2018 of the 4 games that they launched, the longest lasted 65 days, and they were all pretty consistently there in the client for 2 months. This is now 3.5 months, something like that. So what we think is 6+ will stay in the client as a permanent game, given the same stature as Spin and Goes, as Knockout Poker, which is kind of another brand they've got for bounty tournaments, cash games, Zoom, these things. And then they will add another game on top of that. So much like in 2018, they filtered through Fusion, Split Hold'em, Showtime Hold'em. They're going to add another game. And there are 2 current candidates of games that we think PokerStars will be launching. One is Split Omaha, which is a game that we have probably talked about in this podcast. I think we revealed the details for this early on this year. We're maybe going back 3 months. But Split Omaha, as you'd expect, plays just like Split Hold'em, which is that 2 boards, 2 flops, turns and rivers are dealt out, and then the winner of the top board splits the hand with the winner of the bottom board, and if you win both boards, you scoop the pot. And presumably Split Omaha will be this, except with Omaha, so it's you're dealt 4 cards.
So I have a question. In Split Omaha, that has the very real potential of being a 4-way split pot every time, right? The high and low? No?
Oh, that would only if it be played as high-low or 08.
Yeah, mixing that up. Sorry.
It might not be, but generally speaking, I think there are more split pots in PLO than there are in Hold'em, because you have to play 3 cards on the flop. I'm just double checking my logic there, but I think broadly speaking, there are more split pots. So yeah, Split Omaha. I mean, it's just an insane number of cards. I mean, if you have a 6-handed table, it's 24 cards dealt out to the table plus 10 on the board. You're dealing out over half the deck every single game. And if you get to the river with 3 people in it, that is a very complicated showdown that I don't think anyone understands who's winning what money. But yeah, so you will get quartered pots, I guess, fairly common. I think critics will argue that it will be a very rake-heavy game, because obviously the more splitting that you get, the harder it is to have a high win rate. So effectively, the rate can be a bit higher. So that definitely seems like a short-term novelty. I can't imagine that will be. If Split Hold'em's not a huge success, I wouldn't expect Split Omaha to be. But that is still expected to come in the client, maybe as a tournament. We'll touch on that later on in this segment. But the other game that they've got, which is much more curious, is Deep Water Hold'em.
Yeah, so we don't know a lot of details about this one. We do know some that differ from some of the other variants, but just trying to gauge what that game will be like based on the name alone, it's me. I don't know. I mean, deeper stacks?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. So deep, obviously, just is the only thing in there that might be a pun on a poker term, being that, you might sit with deeper stacks. So the only, the theme is very much an ocean theme. You are underwater in it. The W of the water in deep water is like a spear trident thing.
Poseidon, or
yeah.
I always mix up my underwater gods, so I'm not sure which is which.
So, it is Hold'em, so it's going to be a variant on Texas Hold'em, obviously. So the one thing that we could glean is there's the suggestion that there will be a variable ante.
Yeah, so variable. I mean, what would it depend on? I mean, like if you won the last hand. So I know in Hold'em they have, like, they're called kill pots, right? Where the blinds vary depending on if a person won consecutive pots. Wow, it's been a long time since I've played Hold'em in a poker room.
I think that it's a kill pot if someone wins back-to-back pots. I was just thinking there that maybe it's something like the ante increases every time there's a showdown, or the ante increases every time there isn't a showdown until there is a showdown, something like that. So actually, just talking completely out loud, that's a really good, interesting game, because although it probably worked better with like a splash the pot thing, because you encourage people more and more to try and win pots without showdown. But so obviously a variable ante fits in the idea of people sitting deep stacked, because maybe you start very deep stacked, but the ante increases, so you become shallower and shallower as some property occurs.
Yeah, you're right. This is sounding a bit better and more exciting the more we talk about it. And this isn't something that we had talked about prior to right now,
No. So Deepwater Hold'em. So that's, again, something that I think F5 Poker had a little scoop on that. We're going back like 3 or 4 months. We have just seen further indications that this is making its way through PokerStars testing deployment. No,
it's not that far back that we actually published that on F5. I remember because we published it on April 1st, on April Fool's Day, because we weren't quite sure if it was for real. And we figured that would be a good day to put it out there to kind of, CYA in case it turned out that it wasn't actual.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Those are the two next games which seem to be the most likely to go live as their next kind of novelty cash game variant. On top of that, so the Aurora client, we won't delve into that too much. We talked about that, I think, quite in depth last week, but we think that is rolling out. I think it's live now on Mac in many markets. It's gone live, I think, in the .com market in a lot of places. So that is being deployed fairly rapidly. And one other thing is we think 2018's novelty games are going to make a return.
Yeah, so the reason they're going to be making a return is they're going to be offered in tournament format now? Is that correct?
Yeah. So we believe that, and again, this we spied a while back, but it's since been deployed in the global.com client, so other people picked it up as well. But in the filters drop down in the client, where you can filter by what tournaments you want to see, some new games have occurred in that filter, and we have since confirmed that PokerStars is planning. Again, this is no official statement from PokerStars, but sources have told us that they will be deploying some, but perhaps not all, of 2018's games as kind of one-off novelties for some MTTs over the coming weeks.
That should be interesting.
Yeah, so 6+ Hold'em is one that we will almost certainly. In fact, that might be one that might be permanent as an MTT, because the game makes very much a lot of sense, I think, in both sit and go and an MTT format. So that seems to be coming. Showtime Hold'em will come in tournament format, so that's quite interesting. So that's a game where you must show your whole cards. If Mike, can you remember?
Showtime. You have to show them when you fold at least one. Is that what it was?
No, I think you have to show all your hand if you fold on the river, or
I think it was any person that folds at any time. has to. Yeah, wow! Look at us. Okay. We didn't even know what it was.
Yeah. But what I will say is that actually is very interesting in tournament format, because obviously with the tournament you are locked into playing with the same people over a set period of time until tables break down or people get knocked out. So with a cash game, people can get up and leave. But this, you're really going to build up some knowledge about how they're playing based on their folded cards. So I think that's a really interesting addition. They also have got filtered their Showtime Hold'em, which is interesting because Showtime Omaha, because Showtime Omaha didn't launch as a cash game, but it will apparently make its debut in tournament format. So kind of the same applies there. That's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that is debuting as a tournament as opposed to a cash game, so that makes it different. Plus, it's wholly Omaha. Which is also another interesting facet of it. I was wondering is, beyond MTTs, might they bring back some of these variants in some mixed game formats to just sprinkle in here and there? I think that would be an interesting way to get people's appetites wet for these games as well, in the times that they're perhaps not a regular staple or a regular feature inside of the client. And might get people to play them more when they are in there, so that they have enough practice and experience that they're able to play them in those mixed game formats.
Yeah, and in fact, of 2018's games, the only one, or the only two that don't seem to be getting ready to try in tournament format is Unfold is one, and that game just doesn't really make sense in tournament format, because that was the game where if you folded pre-flop, you could unfold your hand on the flop. But the end result was basically you were playing kind of a side game. You built up a side pot with other people who unfolded to compete for different... And there was no skill in it. There was no betting if you unfold your hand. So it was basically kind of like a casino side game. So that obviously doesn't really make sense in tournament format. So that's why that's not coming. And Split Hold'em is interestingly not in the list. And neither is Split Omaha, and both these games... Split Omaha we expect to launch at some point soon, but neither game is listed as in tournament format. And you think Split Hold'em would work in tournaments? I'm not quite sure if there's anything intrinsic there that wouldn't work.
Have you seen MTTs with split games?
Yeah, I mean, high-low is going to be played
still in tournaments. Yeah. True. Okay. So it's good to see them mixing things up. It's good to see them offering it out in different ways, because I think what they're looking for is they're looking for that big hit. They want to get something that is really, really popular. And sometimes, for as much work as you do back in the office or in the lab, it really needs to be put out in the wild to see how players react and adapt and how it's accepted.
Yeah, I think that what they're doing is very good. I think it's and with the Aurora engine, from everything that we understand, it's going to allow them to develop these games much quicker, put them out there much quicker, and start getting that player feedback, start getting the data to see if it's resonating with a certain player type. So I think it's fantastic. And of course, these games that they're developing, they are also developing in the new Aurora client. So 6+ Hold'em, we see the new version in the new client is, in my opinion, much better. Now, I've seen some people, early reviews from high volume players is mixed with this new client, but I think that is due to it just changing. I think we talked about this last week about players just don't like change if they're used to the software that they use day in, day out. And I think some of the niceties that are being added here don't really benefit the higher volume player. But for a new player who might be first introduced to watching it on Twitch or want to download the client, and they're going to see something different, they're going to see something that's much more engaging, just much more exciting visually. So I think these two things combined make for quite an exciting opportunity for PokerStars to move online poker forward, and definitely gives them a real advantage over the competition if they can iterate much faster. And the fact that they've launched 5 new games in the space of a year is pretty impressive, given the classically glacial speed that online poker operators develop these games. Yeah,
from a development standpoint, that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah. So there's one more thing that we should touch on in this segment, because I'm going to need to eat my own words a little bit. Mike, I'm not sure if you remember, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, PokerStars unveiled UFC branding for their spin and goes.
Yeah.
And I was pretty quick to say that I just don't understand why they would take this brand and they would just plonk it on spin and goes and call it done. I didn't really see their bigger picture.
Okay. Tell us what that bigger picture is, because I'm not sure that I see it either.
Well, more for me, but PokerStars have stated their bigger picture to their investors. They had an investors day, I think their first ever, a few weeks ago, and they had a promo video for PokerStars and UFC. It's the perfect partnership, and they really explored the possibilities with what they can do with this UFC brand, and whether some of these ideas that we'll touch on, I think they're very much in the concept stage. So I think it was more to show investor analysis what they can do and why this partnership is so good. It definitely shows that they are planning to do much more with this UFC branding than just sticking it on spin and goes.
Yeah, I think the popularity of the UFC is really the most attractive part for PokerStars, because the potential of reaching new audience is highly coveted by online poker.
Yeah, and to be fair, they show in this slide, it's I can't remember the numbers now, but it's like the UFC reaches like 1 billion homes or something. I'll be honest, maybe I just live in my British bubble, and I actually think UFC is quite big in this country, but I'm pretty sure if I go and ask my friends, they wouldn't know what UFC is. I don't think they would know what it stands for.
Yeah, so it is big here. I can tell you that it's outside of my realm or my reality. I don't follow the UFC. I know plenty of people that are really, really excited about UFC, about MMA. I mean, the whole fight, boxing, everything, the whole fight world is pretty popular here in the U.S. And I think the UFC is, if I think back to my old days of wrestling, it's very, it appeals to a very wide audience, and it's fun and entertaining for those people. It's not so much about the violence of hand-to-hand combat or anything. I think it's more about the show. And when people are entertained and exposed to other products that are being marketed as entertainment products, I think there's a lot of potential there. Yeah,
and so I stand by what I said a couple of weeks ago, that I didn't really understand why they would just... So they took Spin and Goes and just called it UFC Spin and Goes. The game is exactly the same as before, but it's just skinned as UFC. And it's particularly strange because in the client you go UFC Spin and Go, you click on it, and then there's Spin and Go Max, which aren't branded UFC, but it's under this UFC tab. It seemed like a little bit messy, perhaps even fractionally rushed or not fully thought through, but from this presentation it definitely shows that they have a lot more plans for it, make more sense to me. So UFC KO is one thing they talked about, which presumably is a straight rebranding of their knockout tournaments, but that obviously just makes a lot more sense to me. Thematically it makes sense, and I think just knockout is not an already kind of beloved brand that PokerStars has, where I think Spin and Go is. So they also interestingly showed a very short clip of what they called UFC Tornado, which looks really cool. It's a very cool brand. In the client itself, it looks just like Spin and Go. So we're not sure whether this was just an idea for what they could rebrand Spin and Goes to, and they decided to keep Spin and Go and just call it UFC Spin and Go, and just initially they thought, let's call it UFC Tornado. I'm glad they didn't do that, because that would be extremely confusing for the consumer. But another thing is they might take their Spin and Go Max, which is 3 to 8 handed, slightly different rules, and call that UFC Tornado. I could get on board with that. So that's interesting. And they also talked about a couple of potential daily fantasy sports products, UFC Perfect Pick and UFC Payday, which... if you read the article on Poker Industry Pro, we had some guesses of how these games might play. But yeah, so the top line is they have a lot of plans to utilise this UFC brand in a variety of formats in their product lineup.
Yeah, it's definitely it seems to be a strategy to expand their brand in the U.S. market.
And and it's interesting you say the you say the US market. So a promotion they're running right now, I think the current match is, the current bout fight is in Sao Paulo, and or Rio de Janeiro. One of the two. I think it's Rio de Janeiro.
Okay. And I think match works too with wrestling match, boxing match.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Their current promotion, I thought, is really interesting. They are working with local street artists, and they have painted, I think, what's the word?
Graffiti? Murals?
Yeah, murals, that's what I'm saying. Murals, I think, of the fighters hidden around Rio. And if you can find the picture, and I'm guessing snap it and put it on social media, I didn't read the PR, then you get, I think, free tickets to see the fight or something like that. So it's not just US focused. They're very much, I think this is just open to Brazilian players, actually, so you can't fly to Rio. I think a fascinating promotion, and it shows the scope that they have for this partnership.
Wow, yeah, that does sound very cool. Well, we're looking forward to seeing how this unfolds. No, not the game unfolds, just how it plays out. But I'm excited to see it. Speaking of reaching new audiences, one of the more, and it feels weird to call it traditional because it's only, over the past couple of years, but one of the ways online poker companies have been trying to reach new audiences is through Twitch, where they are trying to expose gamers, because it's a gaming platform, to online poker. And I think that things have been on a pretty steady pace over the last, for this year, for example. There's been a lot of news coming out about streamers and online poker streamers in specific, and we have some additional news this week.
Yeah, it's we must touch on this a lot in the podcast. I mean, it's hard to avoid the topic. It feels like we're almost like in a second wave of Twitch focus in the industry. I think a couple of years ago there was a bit of a land grab for Twitch streamers. PokerStars really dominated it with their stable of pros. What we've seen this year is Party Poker aggressively and directly poaching PokerStars streamers. Back in January, PokerStars lost a trio of some of their big streamers, not the absolute top tier, Jason Somerville and I think Lex are probably their numbers 1 and 2, but the next level guys all departed, and then sooner or later switched over and announced their signing with Party Poker. And we saw the last of those three announce their Party Poker ambassadorship this week.
Yeah, that was Kevin Martin. Also of Big Brother fame, or Big Brother Canada fame. I'm not sure, because, again, that's out of my sphere of exposure, I guess, or, just not into reality TV, so I'm not entirely sure what that is, but I know that his name has been associated with some form of reality show, Big Brother. I think it's Canada, I don't know. I'm rambling. He's a former PokerStars streaming ambassador. Not officially the title, but he was the latest to sign, but not to join.
Yeah, so he follows Jeff Gross and Jamie Staples, both who left PokerStars, along with Kevin, back in January time, I think. And the first to announce their signing to Party Poker fairly quickly, although Jamie, as I understand, is on the cusp now of officially starting his ambassadorship. He announced that he would be signing. I'm not quite sure what contractually was going on behind the scenes there. And presumably it's the same with Kevin Martin, who left PokerStars a few months ago and has announced that he is a Party Poker ambassador. Yeah,
I think Jamie is set to join this weekend, maybe.
Yeah.
4th is what sticks in my head.
Yeah, already on the roster of Party Poker is his brother, who joined back in January, along with like 12 other guys, I think.
Yeah, they're taking a pretty aggressive stance toward reaching these new audiences through Twitch, and that mirrors what some of the other companies have done, including PokerStars, including even operators like Unibet and 888 as well, another big one. It feels like there's a lot of focus on reaching these gamers through Twitch.
Yeah, and the other big, these two announcements, the Party Poker one and this PokerStars announcement, came within like an hour of each other, at least in my press release inbox. But PokerStars has announced that they have signed a dozen new ambassadors, all of them with a Twitch focus. 8 of them are under a. I'm just checking the exact terminology. Sounds like they have created a new tier of PokerStars sponsored pro called PokerStars Streamers. That's the new banner. 8 of them fit under that banner, and 4 of them are official PokerStars ambassadors, which I guess is a slightly different. I'm not quite sure how this directory is going to look when they update their website. But yeah, so 12 new guys on the PokerStars team. So a huge expansion for PokerStars. Anybody
of note in that latest batch?
Yeah, so in the PokerStars ambassadors, of which there are 4, number 1 is, and I was quietly laughing to myself before when you were struggling with whether it was Big Brother Canada contestant, because number 1 in the ambassadors list is Ali. I think his name's pronounced Shaban.
Shaban, yeah, I think
Shaban, yeah. And he is a former Big Brother Canada contestant.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that. I knew that he was, part of PokerStars promotion of their Platinum Pass and the Players Championship, but I didn't know he was a reality TV star as well.
Yeah, so he's probably the big name. And, I mean, we suspected this quite a long time ago, that PokerStars was working. I mean, they've been working with Ali for a while. As you say, he won a Platinum Pass back in January. And the lead up to that was very interesting. They worked with him for months over quite an interesting promotion that they were running. And, yeah, we kind of spied that they were going to formally announce him as an ambassador. And he has now signed for the team. So he's probably the most notable name on the list.
Okay. It's, this move towards streamers as ambassadors is kind of reminiscent to me of how ambassadors evolved from just your normal big name TV sponsored pros to online pros. So that was a few years back, but we saw that the way that poker companies were promoting personalities changed from the big TV star people that you'd see, and it's easy now to look back at Full Tilt and say, but you had Howard Lederer and that whole, Daniel Negreanu, that whole group of people, and then it kind of changed to be more localized to the online players, and they started getting, sponsors from particular regions or that played particular games. And now it feels like we're seeing that evolution again into streamers.
Yeah, and that's no clearer than the next 3 on the list of PokerStars ambassadors. So the trio of guys come from the website OP Poker, which was I think a grassroots website kind of players who created strategy, content, and news around Power Up, PokerStars esports title. And they were streaming on Twitch and doing YouTube videos and putting out some really interesting content. They've been kind of on our radar since they launched. Seemed like a genuinely kind of passionate group of poker players who wanted to share strategy about PokerStars' new game. And so it's obviously a perfect fit. They have worked with PokerStars before, with PowerUp, I think, helping them with their community sites. There was definitely some kind of sponsorship, ambassadorship there, helping them with their website. But now they officially, all 3 of them are PokerStars sponsor pros and are going to be streaming this new slate of PokerStars kind of novelty games, innovations that we talked about in the last segment. So they will be, presumably in there when these tournaments get released, streaming their action on whether it's Deepwater Hold'em or Fusion tournaments. So good timing there, and a very smart addition to the team in my mind.
Well, keeping in the theme of poker streaming, perhaps we should start streaming our podcast. What do you think, Nick?
I think that I would have to put a shirt on.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that the viewers would appreciate that. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, some podcasts do, I don't know if they're streamed necessarily, but they're definitely on YouTube and probably streamed as well.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because we have, we keep the podcast directory, and I think you always push for, that we need to start including the video ones. The guys who basically do podcasts on video. So in my mind, I think there's a clear differentiation, because audio I put on my phone and you listen to in your car, where video you watch. But I know Joey calls his, vodcast a podcast, right? I mean, most people do just call them podcast, even though it's, removed from the idea of just pure audio.
And I think there's a difference between what he does and a vlog, for example, because it feels like the vlog relies on the visual experience, where Joey is just having this conversation. And while, it's definitely an added plus to be able to see the people as they're talking, because you get to see their expressions and such. I don't know. It still does feel more like a podcast to me than a vlog does.
That's very true. The listener won't have been able to catch my expression of raised eyebrows when you suggested that we should Twitch stream our podcast.
Yes, it was quite entertaining because we could see each other while we do this. But we will leave it there for this week. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.